Ikak, Puk, Suo, Iseled, Ikil, Deluo, I. I always did have a sweet spot for summoning rituals. I do hope you enjoyed tonight's special treats. Good evening, ghouls and ghosts, and welcome to the final resting place of this year's Spooktober. I am your darkest prophet, Skelemundo, and tonight we will be brushing off our old satanic unholy books as we practice a bit of witchcraft with the chilling adventures of Sabrina. For those of you who may be wondering, yes, this is indeed the same teenage witch who has been casting spells on our hearts for the past 5 decades, although she seems to have come to terms with the darker side of her heritage in recent days. Demonic powers gifted from Satan, ominous rituals cloaked in blood and sacrifice, and a whole temple of devout apostles dedicated to worshipping the Dark Lord's majesty. It's kind of like Harry Potter, except if all the demons and witchcraft and Satanism the God-fearing faithful had worried about so much turned out to be somewhat true. And I do enjoy anything that gives the holy folk a fright. The chilling adventures of Sabrina follows the titular young witch as she straddles the tremulous line between the mortal world she was raised in and the witching world she is destined to join, all while greater forces plot devious plans from the shadows. It's a show that truly lives up to its namesake, as its aura can only be described as confidently chilling. The artistic design and atmosphere of this world reeks of a spooky, unnerving aroma, as though the entirety of it is shrouded in some kind of ominous fog. The settings and surroundings are cloaked in moody, dark shadows. Sinister forces can be felt lurking around every corner, and even on the brightest of days, there seems to be a sense of looming gloom. It is as if the town of Greendale is eternally imprisoned in an eerie, suspended timeline where the past and the present have somehow morphed together into an enigmatic creature that is both wearily ancient yet agelessly youthful. It is a place haunted by endless catacombs of tragic history and scarred by wounds of the past that never properly healed. Definitely not the kind of town you'd want to find yourself lost in the woods at night. Sabrina Spellman herself is something of a beacon of light under this veil of darkness, providing a limitless source of optimism and perseverance in an otherwise uncompromising, unforgiving community. She is stubborn and righteous, willing to do whatever it takes to stand up for what she believes is right and to protect the ones she loves, even at the cost of making some truly unholy sacrifices along the way. It is an interesting juxtaposition, her inherently good nature being seated alongside her demonic witchcraft, and it often results in some morally questionable situations. There's a fine line between reaching an end and the means necessary to achieve that end, and Sabrina's selfish, if good intentions desires sometimes lead her to cross that tainted barrier. It provides an ample crawl space for growth, as she must claw and dig her way out of pits excavated by her own woefully short-sighted agendas. Even with her satanically gifted powers, there are still devastating and irreparable consequences to be paid for her actions, and it is these humbling moments of pain and heartache that allow her to slowly shed the naive shell of adolescence. Still, it is her stubbornness and the bonds with the ones closest to her that ultimately gives her the strength and the power to overcome even the most hellish endeavors. One could even say that her most potent source of magic is friendship. The rest of the supporting cast is a deliciously diverse platter of sweet treats and savory snacks. The Spellman family consists of Sabrina's aunts Zelda and Hilda, who have acted as her primary guardians upon her parents' untimely death when she was still but a wee babe. There is also cousin Ambrose, a charming and handsome young warlock who is trapped under house arrest for some dastardly deeds gone wrong. They each display a powerfully unique soul, with Zelda being pompously overbearing and dangerously blind in her faith, while cousin Ambrose is quick and intelligent and always up for a bit of mischief with Sabrina. But it is sweet Aunt Hilda who really managed to capture my appetite. She provides a much needed counterweight to balance the snooty Zelda, and while her kind, timid nature can be both adorable and aggravating at times, she proves herself to be a beautiful, deadly huntress later on. Don't let her sweetness fool you, my dears, or you may just find yourself in a sugar coma, unable to be woken from. As for Sabrina's mortal friends, she has a relatively small circle, but one that appears to be enchanted with an unbreakable bond. There's Rosalind, her bookworm of a best friend with a streak for justice, and Susie, their genderqueer companion with a heart braver than a ferocious werewolf. And of course, there's her lover boy, Harvey Kinkle, a nerdy artistic type who manages to defy stereotypes and cliches at every opportunity. Harvey provides a solid romantic foundational support, one that surprisingly does not elicit my gag reflex at their every juvenile embrace. Teen romance, an act so nauseating that not even Satan himself would be able to stomach it. Yet somehow, Harvey and Sabrina manage to escape this grotesque fate, and their romance comes off as genuinely authentic and deep. Their relationship is handled with a frightening level of maturity, and I was even more impressed with how their dynamic evolves and transforms over the course of the series. What could have very easily devolved into a petty, sticky web of dramatic teenage nonsense instead gives way to something much more somber and achingly honest. As for the other witches and warlocks, there are the three orphan sisters led by the cold and calculating Prudence Knight, a talented young witch who plays paltry games with her prey in order to hide her insecurities of abandonment. There's Nicolas Scratch, the dashing and delectable young warlock whose smarmy, lusty charms betrays a veritable sense of growing compassion and loyalty to Sabrina. There's Miss Wardwell, who is not exactly a witch and not exactly feeling quite herself either. She masquerades as Sabrina's most revered teacher, but underneath there is something much more sinister and demonic brewing. Her character and her goals drive much of the mystery over the course of the show as we continually muse over her motivations and the ultimate plans of the Dark Lord himself. She has a fantastically spellbinding character arc, one that is nigh impossible to predict and will leave you wishing for her warranted demise while begging for her unholy redemption. And lastly, there is Lord Blackwood, the High Priest of the Church of Night. Oh, this rotten piece of bone meal. Lord Blackwood is essentially a mixture of the blood-sucking monstrosity Dracula, the Nazi abomination Hitler, and that guy who sends unsolicited dick pics to every woman on Snapchat. He is despicable. And for those of you who don't know what that means, allow me to clarify it for you. Contemptible, loathsome, detestable, reprehensible, abhorrent, abominable, odious, vile, ignominious, disreputable, and downright lousy. He is a misogynist to his core, a conservative traditionalist who is hell-bent on returning the Church of Satan to the old ways, or as some of us like to call it, the Dark Ages. You know, I'm all for a grimly good time, but even I have to admit, the Dark Ages were a bit too dark for me. I stubbed a toe pretty bad once, it's a sore subject. The Church of Night is the satanic denomination based in Greendale, and it is the coven where Sabrina and her family practice their witchcraft. It is a flavorful, dark community, and while it may sometimes come off as campy in its homages to traditional witch folklore, their religious rituals and beliefs feel fully developed and whole. Perhaps the most interesting facet of this church are the direct parallels to comparable mortal faiths. Many of their traditions and rituals are simply direct perversions of the mortal equivalents, and despite the satanic undertones of it all, it really doesn't seem any better or worse than a wholesome Christian church, shall we say? Good deeds, awful deeds, all committed blindly in the name of their Dark Lord without question. The true irony of it all is the perceived superiority of the witches and warlocks to the mortal masses, while constantly displaying an equal level of small-minded malleability. Perhaps this is why Sabrina has so much trouble fitting in. Even in the witching world, nobody likes a critical thinker with a big mouth. There are strong themes of traditionalism versus progressivism weaving their way into every segment of this series, particularly at the boundaries of religious faith and personal morality. It is a show that is not afraid to explore the deepest, darkest extremes of this spectrum with grim, bloody consequences as the ultimate price to pay. Perhaps more than anything, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is a darkly satirical deconstruction of man-made religious structures, and despite their supposed standings on the moral high ground, they are all, at the end of the day, utter bullshit.
Faith is not a measure of morality, nor is it a substitute for it, regardless of what particular brand it may be.
Man's lust for power knows no bounds, not even in the dark underworld. It is somewhat odd to me, though, that a show with such lofty thematic ambitions and scathing, unapologetic denunciations of religious institutions would suffer the most from subpar writing. While the story and the world are enveloping and immersive, the actual structure and pacing of the plot feels inconsistent at times. There is an abundance of subplots and side quests popping their head in through the door, but whether we get to see them meet their final fate is Some of them are introduced, then immediately sent to the grave. Some of them float idly about before quietly ghosting away, and yet others seem to start and stop abruptly, as though they are being controlled by a poorly thought out voodoo curse. The main plot of the series itself doesn't even become a fully formed apparition until about a third of the way through the series. It's as if the story started at the main trailhead before wandering off the beaten path to stumble about the woods for the next few weeks before finally reconnecting with the path as a disheveled, shambling mess. And need I remind you, Greendale is not the place to go wandering off into the woods. There is also an over-reliance on explanatory exposition, which results in some truly awkward conversations with forced dialogue. Now I understand this is a very rich world full of magic the simple-minded mortals could not possibly comprehend on their own, but why would the witches need to constantly be explaining this to themselves? It's attempted to be passed off as information Sabrina is learning for the very first time, except she is not new to this world. She was raised in it just like everyone else. So either she has terrible aunties who withheld this information from her for the past 16 years for some reason, or she already knows this information and the writers of the series simply came down with a curse of laziness. The show also feels a bit fluffy and padded at times, which may account for the lack of focus in places, and I'm wondering if perhaps there was simply not enough material to adequately fill a 20-episode cauldron. While the second part of the series does feel much tighter and more driven, the first part does have a tendency to meander in places, and it could have been alleviated if perhaps it was given a shorter run. And this is really just a minor nitpick of mine, but why does nobody ever stop Sabrina'S more, questionably dangerous antics before they happen? Look, I know she's a bit of a rambunctious youth, and those types are notoriously difficult to dissuade, but it does not take a rocket scientist to conjure up exactly what she is scheming ahead of time. Mostly because she announces it to everyone. Zelda? Hilda? You are her guardians. You can't ground her. Literally, if you need to. But I suppose the show would never work if our hot-tempered demoness was constantly shackled up, so I suppose some concessions must be made. So in spite of the somewhat lackluster writing and the occasionally unfocused vision, the chilling adventures of Sabrina more than makes up for these lower quality ingredients. The atmosphere and dark history of the town is an engulfing playground that will spirit you away to this ominous, mysterious land. There are a slew of compelling and enchanting characters, each with distinct personalities and satisfying character arcs that grow them in fruitful and unexpected ways. The Church of Night and the satanic world of the witches is full and flavorful, like a home-brewed stew bubbling with savory essence over a pile of smoldering coals. And the uncompromising, unapologetically dark themes that bleed into every vein of this narrative bring to life a truly visceral and searing experience. Netflix and chill gains a whole new meaning with the chilling adventures of Sabrina. Bones up. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. I hope you enjoyed this year's Spooktober, and I hope that you enjoy the chilling adventures of Sabrina just as much as I did. It is a hauntingly spooky good time. If you enjoy this content, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button down below. You can also head over to Twitter and to Facebook and follow me on there. And as always, if you want to know your flicks, you know where to click. Happy haunting, everyone, and happy Halloween. I will see you all next witching season.